Once, it sold adventure. Now, most people don't even realize it still exists. Banana Republic didn't start as a mall brand. It started as a strange, stylish tribute to world travel, safari jackets, explorer gear, and surreal catalog stories about far-off places. It was part fashion label, part fever dream, weird, specific, and unlike anything else on the racks. But when Gap Inc. took over, the brand got cleaned up, corporatized, and quietly forgotten. Now, decades later, it's trying to reinvent itself yet again. What happens when a brand built on escapism forgets what made it special? And can a forgotten label with a controversial name really make a comeback? This is the story of Banana Republic, and how one of retail's most unique brands got lost in the corporate machine. Banana Republic was never supposed to be a big business. It was a side project, a passion, started by two struggling illustrators who just wanted to travel. Mel and Patricia Ziegler were both working at the San Francisco Chronicle in the late 1970s. He was a reporter. She was a magazine illustrator. They weren't fashion insiders. They didn't have retail experience, but they shared one obsession: collecting. On a trip to Australia, Mel picked up a used British safari jacket from an army surplus store. He wore it constantly, not just because it was stylish, but because it felt like a story. When they got back to the US, friends kept asking where they could find one like it. And that's when the Zieglers had an idea. They started traveling across the world, to Europe, Asia, Africa, buying up dead stock military gear and vintage expedition clothing. Then they brought it home, added their own tags and touches, and resold it from their San Francisco apartment. But what really set the brand apart wasn't the clothes. It was the world they built around them. Every item came with a fictional backstory, written like a travel diary, filled with made-up characters, strange facts, and inside jokes. The Zieglers called their first store Banana Republic Travel and Safari Clothing Company and decorated it with jeeps, jungle props, and hand-drawn signs. Shopping there felt like stepping into a different world. It was retail as storytelling. And it worked. By 1983, they had opened a few small stores and published their first hand-illustrated catalog, which quickly developed a cult following. Customers didn't just browse it. They read it cover to cover, like a travel zine. Banana Republic was selling more than clothing. It was selling fantasy. But that fantasy was about to collide with something else entirely: corporate expansion. By the mid-1980s, Banana Republic had become one of the most talked-about niche brands in the country. It only had a handful of stores, around 24, but the concept was magnetic. It felt personal, handcrafted, a little bit eccentric. And that's exactly what caught the attention of Gap Inc. In 1983, Gap was still figuring out what it wanted to be. It had started as a denim chain, then tried going preppy, then mass market. But nothing quite stuck. Then came Banana Republic, small, weird, and full of character. To the new CEO, Don Fisher, it looked like the kind of creative vision he couldn't build from scratch. So he bought it. At first, the Zieglers stayed on. They kept writing the catalogs, designing the stores, and building the world they had imagined. But the deal came with trade-offs. Gap wanted scale. The Zieglers wanted control. The tension grew quietly behind the scenes. The early signs were subtle. Stores got sleeker. The product line expanded. The safari props gave way to more polished interiors. It wasn't a full rebrand, not yet. But the edges were already softening, and the Zieglers could feel it slipping. By 1988, just 5 years after the acquisition, both founders resigned. The company they had poured themselves into was no longer theirs. Banana Republic had a new vision, and it didn't involve jungle jeeps or hand-drawn catalogs. Under Gap, the transformation accelerated. The travel stories disappeared. The illustrations were replaced with product shots. The brand was streamlined, sanitized, and slotted into the Gap portfolio. Banana Republic wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a mall brand. Once the original vision was scrubbed away, Banana Republic slowly morphed into something else entirely. Gone were the explorer hats and whimsical catalog stories. In their place, clean lines, neutral tones, and upscale basics designed to appeal to the suburban professional. By the early 2000s, Banana Republic had carved out a new niche. It became the elevated sibling in the Gap family. More polished than Gap, more affordable than luxury. Workwear, date-night dresses, wool coats, and Italian leather boots. It was sleek, consistent, and, for a while, successful. The stores were bright and well-organized. The advertising was tasteful, even aspirational. If Gap was the casual weekend brand, Banana Republic was your office wardrobe with a little polish. And it worked, because people wanted that. In the post-9/11 years, quiet luxury wasn't a trend. It was a safety blanket. Banana Republic leaned in, but the problem was, nobody really loved it. Banana Republic's identity had become too polished, too generic. It wasn't weird anymore. It wasn't memorable. And worst of all, it wasn't distinct. The clothes were fine, the experience was fine, but it didn't spark anything. No story, no emotion, no reason to choose it over Zara, J.Crew, or even Gap itself. The decline wasn't immediate. For a while, Banana Republic held its ground. But slowly, the brand that had once been a cultural oddity faded into the background of American retail. Just another label on the racks. It had been fully assimilated, and without its original edge, the decline was inevitable. By the mid-2010s, Banana Republic was everywhere and nowhere. It had over 600 stores globally, tucked into every mall corridor, outlet plaza, and airport terminal. But its presence didn't translate to relevance. The brand was producing competent basics, beige coats, crisp button-ups, tailored pants, but with none of the energy or point of view that made consumers care. It wasn't influential. It wasn't even interesting. It was just there. At the time, Banana Republic sat awkwardly between categories. Its price point was too high for budget shoppers and too bland for luxury aspirants. While Zara released new collections every 2 weeks and J.Crew was still riding its Jenna Lyons era high, Banana Republic was stuck. It didn't know who it was designing for anymore. Fashion critics and former employees alike noted how the brand had lost all personality. There was no story, no lifestyle, no edge. Even its once strong focus on tailoring was being outperformed by newer, sharper labels. The result? A product line that felt stale and worse, unnecessary. Shoppers either traded down to fast fashion or up to brands with soul. Banana Republic offered neither, and internally, things were no better. In 2015, the brand made a high-profile hire. Designer Marissa Webb, formerly of J.Crew, was brought on as creative director to revive Banana's aesthetic. But her tenure was short-lived. Within just 18 months, she was out, reportedly due to creative disagreements and a disconnect between vision and execution. Meanwhile, Gap Inc. was bleeding across all its labels. Old Navy was the only brand pulling real numbers, and resources were being funneled there. Banana Republic became an afterthought, the forgotten sibling in a struggling family. Between 2017 and 2020, the brand shuttered over 200 stores. Sales steadily declined year after year. By 2020, Banana Republic made up less than 15% of Gap Inc.'s total revenue, a dramatic fall for what was once considered the company's premium crown jewel. And then, the pandemic hit. With office wear dead and travel plans canceled, Banana Republic's core offerings collapsed. There was no dramatic scandal, no viral moment, just quiet irrelevance. A brand that had once sold the fantasy of global adventure had become background noise in the American mall. And by the time most people noticed, Banana Republic was already gone from their wardrobes. In 2021, something unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, Banana Republic started looking kind of good again. Gone were the generic mall basics. Suddenly, there were sweeping desert landscapes, linen trenches billowing in slow motion, and dramatic shots of models gazing into the horizon like they were lost explorers. It was giving luxury safari, in the best way. The whole vibe felt expensive, moody, and intentionally nostalgic. It was a full rebrand, and not just visually. The preppy business casual stuff from the 2000s was replaced with oversized knits, sharp coats, earthy tones, flowing maxi dresses, leather boots. For the first time in years, Banana Republic was leaning into an identity instead of blending into the background. And the fashion crowd noticed. Quietly. No one was screaming about it on TikTok, but the aesthetic shift earned some real respect. It felt like Banana Republic had finally remembered where it came from and was ready to go back there, just with better lighting. The campaigns were beautiful, the photography was elevated, the storytelling was giving high-end mood board. It was the kind of rebrand that made you stop scrolling and maybe even check the website. But here's where things fell short. The vision didn't fully translate to the clothes. Yes, there were a few standouts, a well-cut coat, a strong leather boot, but a lot of it still felt like slightly updated mallwear, just dressed up in a good photo shoot. The price points rose, but not always the quality. And when you're trying to position yourself as quiet luxury, that disconnect matters. The materials, the fit, the attention to detail, it all has to back up the image. Instead, it felt a little uneven. Not bad, just not convincing enough. Still, the intention was clear. Banana Republic wasn't trying to chase Gen Z or go viral. It wanted to feel grown up again. Refined. Aspirational, even. And for a brand that had been adrift for years, that in itself was a step forward. But fashion doesn't just reward effort, it rewards energy. And despite the glow-up, Banana Republic still hadn't figured out how to make people care. So while it reinvented the look, the relevance was still up for debate. Today, Banana Republic is in an odd place. It's still standing, it's still trying. And yet, it still doesn't feel essential. The rebrand gave it a visual upgrade, but the brand hasn't quite shaken off its mall store reputation. It's not buzzed about like J. Crew, and it doesn't have the cultural pull of a comeback story like Abercrombie. It's operating in a strange middle ground. Too polished to be scrappy, too commercial to be cool. And then there's the name. Banana Republic was always controversial, a term rooted in colonialism, originally used to describe politically unstable nations exploited by foreign corporations. Back in the 1980s, it was an ironic nod. Today, it lands differently. Some shoppers don't even know what it means. Others know exactly what it means, and don't love that it's still on a clothing tag. To be fair, the company has never directly addressed the name. It's quietly ignored, perhaps in hopes that modern consumers won't look too closely. But in a fashion world that's increasingly conscious of cultural context and branding, that silence stands out. Still, Banana Republic isn't giving up. Under Gap Inc., it continues to quietly evolve, not as a trend-hunting brand, but as a label for adults who want to look put together without trying too hard. It's not flashy, it's not loud, but it is consistent. And maybe that's enough. Because if there's one thing the fashion cycle loves, it's rediscovery. What feels outdated today can feel iconic tomorrow, especially if it's backed by nostalgia, clean design, and the right kind of cultural moment. Banana Republic hasn't had its moment. Not yet. But it might still be on the way. For decades, Banana Republic was a brand in search of an identity. It went from wild to washed out, from khaki-clad explorer fantasy to background noise at the mall. Now, it's trying to be taken seriously again. Luxe fabrics, elevated prices, dramatic campaigns. But is it reinvention? Or just another costume? Because at its core, Banana Republic was never about subtlety. It was strange, specific, a little ridiculous, in the best possible way. And maybe that's what fashion needs more of. So what do you think? Can Banana Republic carve out a real future, or has its best story already been told? Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.